Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Wednesday the 29th of May 2019 and tonight's topic, Bob Mueller misstates the law and then resigns. Yes indeed, Bob Mueller today spoke out for the first time since producing his report on Russian interference in the 2016 election, or better known as the Mueller dossier, on how to impeach Donald Trump. And today, he made a number of misstatements and essentially kept the controversy going, and the opponents of Donald Trump now have even more to go after him. So we're gonna break this down for you, show you where he misstated the law, and then we're going to talk about the significance of his resignation and then refusal to testify or say anything further on the matter. It seems to be all part of a very convenient plan for him to make his statement, drop his report, misstate the law, and then quit. Now, I'm going to show you what I mean by all that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play the essential 57 seconds or 1 minute of his conclusions. And then we're going to listen to his resignation, and then I'm going to give you the analysis. All right, so let's listen to what Bobby has to say when he is making his determination that he could not find, or if he could have, he would have said that Trump was not guilty. And then he goes on to say, and he couldn't do that, but even if he wanted to do that, it would have been unconstitutional to do it because you can't charge a sitting president with a crime. Both of those statements are misstatements of the law. So let's hear in Bobby's own words what he said today.
And as set forth in the report after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. The introduction to the volume 2 of our report explains that decision. It explains that under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited. The special counsel's office is part of the Department of Justice, and by regulation, it was bound by that department policy. Charging the president with a crime was therefore not an option we could consider.
Now, you see what he cleverly did there. First, he said, look, if we could have found stuff that would have exonerated Trump, we would have said so, but we didn't exonerate him. We didn't say there was that he didn't commit a crime. We're not confident that he didn't commit a crime. And then he goes on to say, and we couldn't have charged him anyway because of this. It's a policy. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution. But let's listen to it again. And you can see what he's doing. It's very clever, and it's 100% incorrect legally. Let's go back and break it down.
And as set forth in the report after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
Stop. The prosecutors or special prosecutors, special counsel's job is never to issue statements exonerating anybody. He's making it sound like, look, we could, if we were convinced that he hadn't committed a crime, he's already starting on the wrong premise legally. That is never, ever, ever a prosecutor's job to come out and say, yeah, we've looked at everything and we found him innocent. It turns everything on its head. The idea of a special counsel or a prosecutor, their job is either to make an indictment, which he claims he can't do because of the Constitution, or a recommendation, or a finding. He could have made findings that Trump had obstructed justice. Doesn't mean he had to indict him. He could have made a finding that there was Trump-Russian collusion. He didn't make any such finding. But instead of saying, I didn't find anything, he says, I didn't find anything that would lead me to believe that Trump didn't commit a crime. That is, it would be moronic if it wasn't so serious. He's changing the entire standard of what his job is. His job is not to find information that he can come out and say, hey, I'm giving Donald Trump a clean bill of health. That was never, ever his job to do. Now he goes on.
We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime.
And you weren't supposed to make that determination. But he's doing this in order to keep this charade up, in order to give the opponents of Donald Trump something to latch onto, saying, see, the guy, he could not say that Donald Trump is innocent, and therefore we got to find him to be guilty.
The introduction to the volume 2 of our report explains that decision. It explains that under long-standing department policy.
Stop. Yes. In 1973, a memo was written saying that it was Department of Justice policy that a sitting president couldn't be indicted. That memo was updated in the year 2000 and said things along the same lines. It's very important to note there is nothing in the Constitution that prohibits a sitting president from being indicted, and there has been no Supreme Court case adjudicating that issue, meaning there's nothing explicit in the Constitution that says you can't indict a sitting president, and the Supreme Court has never ruled on it. So for him to say, it would be unconstitutional for him to make an indictment, what he's doing is he's hiding behind a fake straw man. He's saying, no one would really know what I would have done because remember, I could not find Donald Trump innocent because if I did, I would have said so. And, I couldn't even bring charges if I wanted to because it's unconstitutional to do so. That is not correct. It is not unconstitutional to do so. Those are two policy memos for which he is bound by the Department of Justice, possibly. Ken Starr said he wasn't bound by that memo. So it's even the policy itself that you can't indict a sitting president. The policy by the Department of Justice is not written in stone, and it's clearly not written in the Constitution, nor has it been adjudicated by the Supreme Court. So he's hiding behind that because he's trying to give the impression to Trump's opponents that, hey, I can't do it because I'm prohibited, but hey, you guys can go have at it. Now, he is correct. Congress has always had the ability to go after any president and to impeach him. That is the process. And that's some of the rationale behind those memos is that the president would be incapacitated and then we could just bring indictments, and that what the Constitution does explicitly provide for is an impeachment process, which comes from, so you could have a negative inference, but there's nothing explicitly that says you cannot indict the president. It says you want to remove the president, you have to have a 2/3 vote of the Senate to get rid of him. And that's basically what Mueller seems to be advocating for. Because remember, Mueller is best buddies with Comey, and when Comey got fired, he is the one who who leaked information to his buddy to leak to the New York Times and the Washington Post in order to get a special counsel appointed. And that special counsel is Comey's buddy, who he then went and hired 20 Democrats, or 19 out of 20 Democrats, including a former lawyer for the Clinton Foundation. So clearly, this was not something that was looking into Russian collusion. It was looking into how do we find some dirt on Trump. We're going to get to that in a second in his resignation. Let's finish off with this particular part.
A president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional.
Wrong goes Starr. It is not unconstitutional. That is an interpretation by a Department of Justice memo that has never been adjudicated. No one has challenged it. What he could say is what he should have said, but it sounds better for him to make it sound like the Constitution prevents me from indicting the president. What he should have said, well, there's a department memo that says I can't do it. Well, that wouldn't have sounded as harsh because a lot of people would have said, hey, why don't you challenge the memo? Why don't you go ahead and bring the indictment? The reason is there's nothing to indict him on because his own investigation showed no collusion. And then the main thing was, well, we got him on obstruction. They probably determined there was no collusion within the first day. He probably already knew that from the beginning. But then they figured the longer they can keep the investigation going, the longer they can chip away at the confidence in Donald Trump to portray him as some type of traitor, and then hope that either A, fires Mueller, triggering some type of crisis where people would want him impeached, or he does something that we get him on obstruction. But it's clear to me that they never had anything, because in his memo, he never talks about the origins or really examines in great detail why they started this investigation in the first place. So he continues. He says it's unconstitutional, and that's why he doesn't say, I wouldn't have brought, I didn't bring a charge because there wasn't enough evidence. He's making it sound like he didn't bring a charge because it would have been unconstitutional to do so, leaving the inference that, well, there probably is something there, so maybe Congress should go after him.
Even if the charge is kept under seal and hidden from public view, that too is prohibited.
Yeah, prohibited. He's making it sound like, again, unconstitutional.
The special counsel's office is part of the Department of Justice, and by regulation, it was bound by that department policy. Charging the president with...
See what he does? He's correctly now stating actually what his issue is. His issue is he's bound by department policy. But the first thing he said was it's unconstitutional. It's not.
The crime was therefore not an option we could consider.
And therefore, something is wrong. We couldn't actually do our job because it would have been against the Constitution. That instills rage in people. You mean the president? That Mueller wrote 400 pages, and if you read it, it's full of stuff that says he's a scoundrel and he should go, and our Constitution doesn't allow us to get rid of the guy? Well, we must impeach. Clearly, that is what he's angling at. Now, here's what he says at the end. Now, you would think if he was this big warrior to take down Trump, he'd stay in the fight. But he knows he's already lost. And he was very shaky during this. If you watch it, he's quivering. He's not very confident. Listen to what he says here when he finishes his remarks.
Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself.
All right, so what he's doing here is saying, look, I've given you guys enough stuff. I've already told you that I can't. I've told you two things which are incorrect. One, I could not clear the president, because if I could have, I would have come out and said he's innocent. But I couldn't do that. And two, if I wanted to indict him, which the inference is I wanted to, but I couldn't because the Constitution prohibited me, he's now saying, you've got the memo. You see how I'm kind of hostage to these laws that I invented, that my job was to find him innocent and I couldn't do it, and then I couldn't indict him because I'm not allowed to under the Constitution. And now he's saying, and I can't even come see you because you've got my memo. Now, there's a reason he doesn't want to go to Congress. And if I were in the Republican Party, I would subpoena him and make him come to the Congress. And if Barr has got any intelligence, he would investigate Mueller and find out how he conducted this investigation. Because you know Rosenstein was not supervising him. Rosenstein was supposed to be supervising Bob Mueller during this entire time, and it seems that Rosenstein was part of the whole cabal to try to get rid of Trump. And I think that's why he wrote the memo, to get rid of Comey, so they can say that there was obstruction of justice. And remember, Rosenstein was the Deputy Attorney General under Sessions, who said, I'm going to recuse myself, and allowed Rosenstein to be the Deputy Attorney General, who appointed this special counsel, who was also the guy who was working with the other FBI people in a meeting, said, you want me to wear a wire? And he also, to catch Trump on the 25th Amendment for being a nut job. And he also is the signer of the fourth FISA warrant spying on the president or the president's people. So they're all part of this whole cabal here. And what Mueller is concerned about, and if I was a Republican, I would call him in and ask him, first of all, when did you make a determination that there was no collusion between Trump team and the Russians? Did you determine that early? Because if you think about what happened during the investigation, everything that came out, other than the indictment of the Russian troll farm, where they bought like $160,000 worth of ads on Facebook, hardly a big deal, was all about things that had nothing to do with Russian collusion. You had Paul Manafort's dealings where he didn't register as a foreign agent. You had his tax issues. Then they raided Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. They found him for tax evasion, lying on loan applications. Then they went after Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi. Way deep into this, like almost 2 years after they started, is when they started bringing indictments against people for had nothing to do with Russian collusion. Now, it begs the question, again, if I had him in front of Congress, is why were you doing that? If it was Russian collusion, weren't there other things like how did this start? Let's take a look at the FISA warrants. Let's take a look at Christopher Steele. He got information from the Russians in order to put in that dossier. Do you know anything about that? There's none of that mentioned in the report. And yet he had this very broad mandate. It seemed to go after anything related to the Trump people. I mean, getting people on, there's, sure, if you pick up some tax evasion, you pick up some failing to file some form, if you're going to do lobbying for a foreign government, yeah, go after them. But was that really what this was about? Because if you're trying to do something that's as important, remember, you're the special counsel. You're supposed to be the defender of national security because the Russians interfere with our democracy. And then you could say, well, I got Paul Manafort because he didn't file a form, and I got Michael Cohen because he had these taxi medallions and he wasn't paying taxes on them. Okay, but that's not really the purpose of the investigation. So I would ask him that question. He knows he would get those types of questions. How did this whole start? And when did he know or make a conclusion that there was no collusion with Russia? And it seems to me, since the half of the report, which wasn't even conclusive, on the obstruction of justice, seemed to be keep the investigation going on through the midterm elections. Keep that cloud over. Keep it going on. I think it would still be going on had Sessions finally not gone and then Bill Barr come in. I think they wanted to maintain this cloud all the way through 2020 and eventually get to impeachment, or at least get him to get out of office in 2020. So the question is, why did it take so long? Why was all this going on? And why was he not focused exclusively on the Russian collusion angle? Which it seems to me that when you're going after Michael Cohen for taxi medallions and Paul Manafort, what it did is it created Paul Manafort for not filing certain documents. It gives the appearance that Trump is surrounded by shady characters, which, okay, he is, but that's not a crime. I mean, if you think about all these politicians, they either are the shady themselves or they're surrounded by shady characters. We don't have investigations into the fact that Washington's full of shady characters, and therefore we need a special counsel. So this is something that I think that Robert Mueller was very cowardly, because he knew, I think when he went into this, he didn't expect to have to keep this charade up for so long. And then finally, when Bob Barr came in, he realized they had to come to a conclusion, and they knew that they could not make a finding that Trump had colluded with the Russians if he hadn't done so, because then Trump would have taken it to court and they would have had to bring their evidence. And if they didn't have the evidence, they would look really foolish. It's the same reason why they didn't bring they brought indictments against the Russians for buying those Facebook ads and trolling on the internet, but they never ever had to litigate it. So reason number one why Mueller did not make a finding well, he says he didn't indict anyone because he's not allowed to. Okay, but he still could have made a finding that Trump colluded with Russia. Well, he knew then that they'd have to bring that case. Even if he couldn't indict it, then he would be asked to show the evidence. And since he didn't have any evidence, he would look like a complete moron. So then what they did was they figured, well, we can get him on obstruction of justice. And even there, they couldn't do it because they know they'd have to litigate that one too. And they said, well, we can't litigate it because we can't indict because of the Constitution. So they could have made a finding. But again, that would have been challenged. And since they really don't have anything other than innuendo, which again, if you're not going to make a finding and you're not going to indict, you don't present evidence. This was clearly designed, once they realized they couldn't get him, was to provide a roadmap to the Democrats and say, here, look, there's a lot of stuff here. I can't do anything about it because Constitution doesn't let me do this nonsense. And here, you guys have at it. And then Mueller says, and by the way, I'm out of here. I'm not coming to talk to you. I'm resigning. I'm going to go off. He did not. I actually think he's in legal jeopardy because the way he ran this, I don't know who allowed him to hire partisan lawyers, allowed them to raid Michael Cohen, Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi with SWAT-style raids for things that had nothing to do with the matter at hand. I have no idea what they thought going after Paul Manafort on his lifestyle had anything to do with Russian collusion. It was all designed just to show there's bad guys around Trump, there's a bunch of shady characters, but it never showed anything to do with Russian collusion. So Mueller, essentially, after he misstates the law twice on constitutionality and somehow that his job was to so state if Trump was innocent, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't exonerate him because he couldn't find enough exculpatory evidence. It's hard to prove a negative, and that's not the standard, the legal standard. And then what does he say here?
And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
Meaning he doesn't want to defend anything he's put in there and give any color on how he came to any of the conclusions, how he hired the people, whether he considered any conflicts that he may have had or any of his lawyers may have had on this. No, he doesn't want to talk about that at all. He's basically said, here's raw intelligence, just like a dossier. Take it and go impeach him.
In addition, access to our underlying work product is being decided in a process that does not involve our office. So beyond what I've said here today and what is contained in our written work, I do not believe it is appropriate for me to speak further about the investigation or to comment.
No, it's very appropriate if there's questions about what you've done because you've left it open-ended. What would normally happen is if you made findings, then you would say my findings stand, and if they needed to be litigated, they'd be litigated. And then you could make the argument that I don't care what these Department of Justice memos say. But Ken Starr said that, he didn't think that those memos applied to him. What Mueller is doing, he's creating a false straw man that is handcuffing himself so that he can't act because he wants to leave the impression that he would have acted. And remember, he couldn't find Trump innocent, so you guys have to act. And by the way, don't ask me any questions because I'm not going to be around. And I don't think there's any point in me being around. I've given you the stuff. You guys go and have at it.
On the actions of the Justice Department or Congress. And it's for that reason I will not be taking questions today as well.
And then he basically says, and anything you want to ask me right now, and I'm going to answer that. And that's exactly what he does.
Now, before I step away...
And he thanks everyone. Okay. And he doesn't take any questions. He makes a statement. He says, I've given you the work product. I've told you that Trump, I would have said he wasn't guilty, but I can't say... And by the way, when he says, I can't say that he's not guilty, he's referring to the obstruction of justice charge. So he doesn't specifically say that because he's already found him not guilty of Russian collusion. So what they're trying to do, the way he's wording that is to make it sound like, wow, he colluded with Russia and then he obstructed it. And I couldn't bring a case because of the Constitution. So Congress, you know what happened. You guys go and have at it. Very, very disingenuous, incorrect statements of law. And the problem with all this is, it's just like, let's bring it all back to what we talk about all the time, gold, silver, and crypto. People will believe anything as long as it supports their narrative. That's how it works. You'll believe in the gold back yuan, game changer, silver shortage, multipolar, whatever it takes. JP Morgan's buying silver eagles. As long as it supports your narrative, doesn't matter if it's fake, can be proven to be false. If you're against Trump, you want to hear that, look, Bob Mueller said he couldn't find him innocent. Bob Mueller said it's against the Constitution to indict him, and he probably would have done so, wasn't for that pesky Constitution. And if you don't like Trump, you think, yeah, gold back yuan, game changer, whatever it is. All right, let's see what you guys are thinking about this. I thought it was a fiasco, and I hope that Bob Mueller is included in when they take a look at how this whole thing was set up, how it came to be that they were going to do an investigation, how Rod Rosenstein made the decision that Bob Mueller should be the guy, and what his marching orders were, what was in his scope, and then have Bob Mueller and his team actually conducted this investigation. What did they know? When did they know that there was no collusion? I think these are things that need to be, and I'm glad. The other thing is, and the reason I mentioned it, he resigned. He's gone to now too. You've lost Comey, Clapper, Brennan. A lot of these key players are all gone now, and they're still out there, because they still have media access. Either they work for the media, like Clapper and Brennan, they have jobs with the media, or like Comey, they got they've got a blank tabula rasa, which is redundant, but they have, he has a free reign if he wants to write op-eds for the Washington Post, New York Times, proclaiming his innocence. It's how he got the special counsel appointed. He leaked his memo to a buddy who leaked it to the New York Times, and then there's a story, and somehow, because it's in the New York Times or the Washington Post, it's supposed to have some type of weight, and therefore we need a special counsel. Now, let's see what you guys are saying or thinking about these actions today. Obese Asian man. That's the guy's name, his screen name. These titles get me every time. Greetings, folks. Tossing Molotovs. Ann is here. Let's see if you got any questions for me here. Yes, and that's right. I heard it too. His voice was trembling. He is I mean, it's obvious that this was not an up and up investigation. It was a setup to begin with. And then when the setup failed, they had to carry on as if the setup was real. So they had to set up a special counsel to investigate the setup and then come to the conclusion that there was Russian collusion. And they somehow couldn't do it. Smartest thing Trump ever did was not firing Comey, letting this whole thing play out. And now they're all trying to say, oh, well, humana. All right. Yes, and Ken Singster noticed the same thing. He had trouble reading the prepared statement. Absolutely. I mean, I watched it. I thought, what's he nervous about? He's the big bad prosecutor. He sounded like he was, to someone like me, I said to myself, what is he talking about? He's still going with the line that he couldn't find Trump innocent because if he could have found him, he would have said so. That's against, that's not his job. And I would think there's a policy against making statements like that. It's an incorrect way of even thinking about what your job is to say, well, I would have found him innocent if I could have, but we just couldn't find him innocent, so we just didn't, we just couldn't do it, and we might have indicted him, but we're not allowed to do that either. Constitution. Yeah, Biden. Yeah, unbelievable. And with Biden, I saw him the other day. There was a picture of him. He was greeting some woman on the the pedestal and he's giving her a grab, and I was like, what's he doing? I mean, this stuff is already out there that's what he does, and then today's apparently was doing the same thing with I don't know. Let's see, what else do we have here? They have their own agenda. That's correct. All right. Phil McCain says Smaulgld for Attorney General. You know what bugs me in all this is you would think there would be something akin of nonpartisanship. You would think some Democrats would say, okay, I get it. This didn't work out. But what happens is, and it shows how powerful narratives are. Once you believe them, this brings it right back to gold and silver. Once you believe in a narrative, it is so hard to get that out of your craw. So I'm sure there were people that were part of this scheme, and they knew it was fake from day one, and they just said, this is what we got to do, so they did it. And then maybe they start to believe it once they're doing it because they get involved in it. Then there's other people who probably knew it was fake, but they wanted it to happen, so they go along with it. But I actually think 80-90% of the people and the other congressmen and senators that weren't in on it, that just wanted to believe it, just assumed it's all true. And they went with it, and they find it very hard to believe. Now that they've vested all of it, what happens is you invest your time, effort, your emotion, whatever it is, your energy, your reputation on a particular narrative, as dumb or false as it may be, you're not going to give it up. That's just, we've seen it in gold and silver. No, gold back you want. No one's ever said, oh, we messed that one up. That was wrong. That never happened. JP Morgan buying silver eagles. No one's. The good thing about some of these narratives are you can't prove that it's not true. That's what a lot of. It's the same with what Mueller did. He basically said, well, we can't prove he's innocent. No. The whole time you guys are saying he was guilty. So what you do is when you can't prove him guilty, you say, well, we can't prove him innocent. And that's the same thing with all these narratives. You can't prove that China's not going to do a gold back yuan. You can't prove that JP Morgan didn't buy hundreds of millions of silver eagles. You can't prove, that's what happens when you have a narrative, and that's what we have happen here. All right. Well, I think that's about it for tonight, and I just wanted to get that out there. I almost wasn't going to cover this because it was so distressing the way this is one of the chief law enforcement guys. He was also, I believe, head of the FBI, and the way they'll twist the law or twist what their mandate is, what they're supposed to be doing in order to make a political point. Well, then, you don't have justice. You have rogue prosecutors when they can't acquit. When they can't prosecute, either because they don't have the facts on their side or they don't have a case. He basically says, well, it's not that I don't have a case. I just can't prove that he's innocent. And even if I had a case, which I think I do, it's unconstitutional. Unbelievable. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining me tonight. And we'll be back to the normal news cycle tomorrow on all this. Not on all this. I don't want to talk about this anymore. But I just thought we'd get this one out of the way. And tomorrow we'll talk about gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies and the economics and maybe even some housing stories. All right. Thank you very much. Remember, if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting Smaulgld by check or sending items of value to Smaulgld LLC, P.O. Box 714, Dover, New Hampshire, 03820. Or someone did send me a little Litecoin last night. Thank you very much for that. Litecoin or Bitcoin. The addresses are on the QR codes on your screen, or you can go to smaulgld.com. They are there as well. Or consider becoming a patron or a Subscribe Star Mug Club member. Or you can make a one-time or recurring donation via PayPal. And of course, you can always either add to your mug stack at smaulgld.com, buying a classic or super classic mug, which I send out. Priority 2-day mail shipping for free included in the price, actually, in the continental U.S. That's the classic and super classic mugs. And you can also order other Smaulgld branded items like Smaulgld beer steins and beer mugs and pet bowls and t-shirts and hats at the Smaulgld store, also available on smaulgld.com. Thanks everyone for listening, and if we don't have any more questions in the next few 10 seconds. Bernie's going to give you the countdown. We will say goodnight. All right, Bernie.
All right, so we're going to give you the countdown to impeachment of Donald Trump. 10, and then he goes. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1%, 0. Impeach Donald Trump. Good night.